Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think we ought to start by welcoming our three-time mayor, Wes Wise, and his wife, Sally, and son, Wynn. They came up from Cedar Creek today. Now, in 1969, Wes Wise, a popular broadcast journalist, decided to run as an independent for a place on the Dallas City Council. His opponent was the businessman nominee of the all-powerful Citizens Charter Association, which, since its formation in 1930, had dominated City Hall with slates primarily made up of businessmen. Well, Wes defied the odds and won that race, becoming the only independent on the council. After just one term, he took aim at the top spot, mayor. The powerful, outgoing mayor, Eric Johnson, publicly complained that Wes lacked the business background required for that office. Now, Wes countered with this zinger. Do you mean that no lawyer, no accountant, no journalist, no teacher can ever be mayor of Dallas? Well, Wes went on to win that race, once more as an independent, and he was reelected 2 more times. In fact, never again would a CCA candidate become mayor of Dallas. And before the decade was over, the CCA, for all the good that it had done, really, folded its tent and disappeared. Now, much earlier, Wes had worked with Gordon McClendon at the local and powerful radio station KLIF, affiliated with the Liberty Broadcasting System's 450 stations. McClendon, with Wes's help, took sketchy wire reports as a particular Major League Baseball game progressed and dramatized it so listeners thought they were actually hearing play-by-play reports direct from the ballpark. Millions of listeners, which included me, were totally fooled and fascinated by these popular broadcasts. They included imaginative but totally made-up descriptions of blazing fastballs, foul balls being hit into the stands, all with fake crowd noises. Finally, after several years, it ended, but it represents one of the most colorful episodes in radio history. Now, a month before President Kennedy's arrival in Dallas in 1963, UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson spoke here. He was assaulted afterwards in the parking lot by an ugly crowd of protesters who had constantly interrupted his talk inside. Wes was a newsman then with KRLD, and he captured on film as a great scoop the famous moment when an irate woman from Oak Cliff hit Stevenson over the head with her picket sign. The soon-to-be famous film was broadcast and repeated across the nation by Walter Cronkite on his evening news program. Cronkite praised this, quote, alert young cameraman, Wes Wise. Stills taken from that film appeared in newspapers across the country. A month later, Wes, of course, covered the assassination of the president in Dallas. Well, I think, as we said, Wes and his wife, Sally, now live at Cedar Creek Lake near Eustis. Now we're going to hear from the history maker himself. Wes, if I may call you Wes, since I've known you since the 1960s.
Let me test the microphone. That's part of my background.
You know that.
1, 2, 3, it's on.
Okay. Maybe you could start us off by telling us what prompted you to leave your native Shreveport and come to Big D?
Well, I was on a debate club sponsored by Byrd High School, where I went to school. By the way, my politics had started before that when I was elected president of the graduating class of Crestwell Grammar School. So, and but I was on a debate trip to Dallas at Jesuit High School. And I remember vividly coming out on the top steps of Jesuit High School and looking out over Oak Cliff and saying to myself, this is where I want to settle. And that's where I settled. It was in Dallas quite a long ways a little later.
Well, that's great. Let me ask about how you had an opportunity to work with Gordon McClendon, and most of you probably know the name Gordon McClendon. How did that come about?
That was the old Scotchman, as they called him.
Right.
And I saw Bob Schieffer recently, and I think you all know who Bob Schieffer is, the great newsman from Fort Worth. And I said something about my background as with the Liberty Broadcasting System, and he says, "Oh, hello, everybody everywhere. this is the old Scotchman, Gordon McClendon. And that was the way he introduced the program every day and was always known as the old Scotchman. And he used to get many letters from time to time saying, how old are you anyway?
Right.
Well, of course, he was only about 28, something like that. But one quick thing about I was drafted into the Army out of the Liberty Broadcasting System in 1951. Somebody at the time said, well, you could probably get out of the draft because you contribute to the morale of people on your play-by-play baseball. And I said, I'm 21, I'm single, I'm a draftee, and I'm going to serve the country, and I was glad to do that. When I went in, I did all the KP things that privates do. I peeled potatoes, I served onions, I served my fellow soldiers, mostly buck privates like myself. And one day, McClendon, not to my knowledge, said, our old sidekick, Wes Wise, is in the service, and here is his address. He gave the address, and he said, have your pencil and papers ready, because I'm going to repeat it twice during this play-by-play broadcast. He did that without my knowledge. I had no idea of it. So about 3 days later at mail call, they called out Private Wise, and I said, here, and they brought out 3 duffel bags of fan mail. And then it dwindled down to 2, and then down to 1, and it was really kind of funny because I would go back into the barracks, and all my fellow buck privates would read my fan mail with me, and every now and then there'd be one with criticism. And some of them told me later they hid those from me.
That's great. Now, after the Army, of course, you returned to Dallas, I suppose, and went to work for WFAA TV.
Right. I went to work for Jimmy Noe, KNOE in Monroe, Louisiana, as a disc jockey and also as a sports broadcaster. And Gordon was Governor Noe's, by the way, Governor Noe was Huey P. Long's lieutenant governor, and everybody called him governor, and he became one of my favorite all-time people in my background. And he called me one time it wasn't a rooming house, it was a room in a private home where I lived in Monroe. And he says, Wes, Gordon McClendon wants you to come to work for him with the Liberty Broadcasting System in Dallas. By that time, the network on radio, this was strictly radio. In fact, there was very little television anywhere then. His network had grown to about 470 stations nationwide. And I said, well, Mr. Noe, I'm going to have to think about that. And he says, no, you're not going to have to think about it. You get your butt on that train tomorrow. And so I came on to Dallas, and that's when I went to work for the old Scotchman.
All right, I see. Now, you were with WFAA finally in Dallas, and Eddie Barker, most people know about Eddie Barker, the legendary news director for KRLD, wrote that after you had feuded with Tex Schramm, general manager of the Dallas Cowboys, WFA fired you. Now, right. Can you clarify that picture?
Well, one doesn't clarify one's firing. But it was awkward because I broadcast the 620 and 1020 sports on WFAA, which was the ABC station, and then I'd go on Friday on KRLD TV Channel 4, the CBS station, doing the Cowboy broadcasts, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work because I wasn't able to go to see the workouts of the teams ahead of time, as you should do before broadcasting the games. And to be very frank with you, Mike Shapiro, then the manager of WFAA TV, somewhat rightfully didn't like the idea of my going off of his station and onto the competitive station right the other way. And so one day he came into the office and said, we're going to have to let you off the 620 and 1020 sports. And I said, well, then I'm being fired. And he said, well, if you want to look at it that way. And having had no other way to look at it, I was told that I was the first person to go from the 620 and 1020 sports, which of course is the highest rated sports broadcasts, from one station and go on the last broadcasts on Friday and go on another station on, the last station on Friday and go to the other station on Monday without any break whatsoever. And when Jim Underwood, who was the weatherman and later became my closest friend and manager in politics, came over and offered me the job at Channel 4, I said, well, I'll accept it if Bill Mercer, who is also a sports announcer at KRLD, approves. And so he came back and said, Bill said he would be glad to have you, which of course I've always appreciated. And so when Shapiro came back in to tell me to please not mention that I was leaving and going to work at Channel 4, I said, well, Mike, I haven't been offered that job yet. And he said, oh, yes, you have. He said, I've been informed that you're going to do the 620 and 1020 sports. And I said, oh, well, they must have met my demands. My demands were when Underwood said, aren't you going to ask how much you are going to make over at Channel 4? And I said, I don't care how much I make. I'll just be there at 620 for the 20 sports.
Now, one thing that was different at KRLD was that you did more than sports. Your general news and the commentary show. Could you tell us?
Very much so. So, in fact, the first talk show in Dallas was a show called Comment on radio, on KRLD radio, every day from 1 p.m. till 3 p.m. And it had an amazing lineup of personalities on it. Eddie Barker himself, Jim Underwood, Frank Lieber, who has passed away, Bob Huffaker, who was co-author of a book we just finished, Warren Foulkes. It was really an outstanding lineup of people, and as a result of that lineup of people, we got the first interview with Marina Oswald, the wife of Lee Harvey Oswald, after the assassination. Her favorite program was not us, but it was the program at 10:30 starring Merv Griffin, but the news, weather, and sports involved Warren Foulkes, Jim Underwood, and me. And as a result of that, we got the first interview with her after the assassination.
Yeah, that's great. Now we come to 1963. Mm-hmm. Now, you've described that year in a book you co-authored entitled When the News Went Live, Dallas 1963. Now, tell us a bit about the political climate that existed in Dallas prior to the president's visit. Were you working the story, for instance, when LBJ and Lady Bird were met in the Adolphus Hotel lobby?
Yes, I have. At that time, the Citizens Charter Association had been in power in city politics for something like 34 years. Mm-hmm. And I did not disapprove of the people who were members of the CCA. People like James Aston, Eric Johnson, Bob and Charles Cullum, and I could go on and name quite a few others who were mainstays of the Dallas political and business climate. Were well, for want of a better term, not dictators exactly, but the ones who commanded how the Citizens Charter Association would go politically. And I just felt that it was too closed of a shop, that the other people, especially women, especially minorities, just didn't have enough voice in city government. So one day I said to Jim Underwood, I said, I think I'm going to run for the city council. And he said, well, I believe you could win. This was in the 1960s, and you've got to remember that was the year that JFK was assassinated in Dallas. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The Vietnam was going haywire. And looking back on it, I think that had a lot to do with my determining to run for the city council. When I ran for the city council, I immediately established that I would be available to anybody who wished to come to see me every Wednesday afternoon from 1 until 3 p.m. and I continued that as mayor. Admittedly, if I did that today because of terrorism, I would still try to do it, but it would have to be done with much more of a careful consideration for terrorism, for possible assassination, to be very frank with you, than was the case then.
I remember that Earl Cabell had the same policy of a certain afternoon he would meet with the public, and then when Eric Johnson became mayor, he cut that out. Eric was too busy to continue it. But,
to be frank with you, I didn't remember that Cabell had done that,
yeah.
but Earl was a friend of mine, and I appreciated him.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask, going back to the early 60s, when Adlai Stevenson came here to speak on the occasion that I've mentioned, you were president of the Dallas Press Club, and you met him, I believe, at lunch that day. I'm wondering what your impressions of Adlai Stevenson were prior to the evening fiasco, and whether or not perhaps he or you anticipated that there might be trouble that night.
Well, he came with me to the press club for a news conference, and of course I introduced him as president of the press club at that time, and I never will forget it. He was coming down on the elevator with me, and somebody muttered on the elevator, so what is that SOB doing on this elevator? And I still wonder to this day whether Adlai Stevenson overheard that comment or not. But he said that was one of the best news conferences I've ever had, and it made me proud of the press club, which was mostly made up of, at that time, of print journalists, not radio, TV journalists.
Now, of course, that evening at Memorial Auditorium, he was confronted during his speech, and I was there for that occasion, by the way. During his speech, he was confronted by hostile demonstrators who tried to prevent him from even speaking. And did that come as a surprise to you when you saw all that bedlam?
The demonstration surprised me. I believe in the policemen, and I believe in the Dallas policemen big time. But before the meeting started, one of the demonstrators had an American flag out in the lobby of the theater, which was the small theater with the convention center. Right. And they were waving the flag, and this policeman said, "Let's get that American flag out of here." Well, that was just like pouring gasoline on this demonstrator. He said, nobody's going to tell me when I can wave my flag, which I have to agree with him on that. But that was one of the demonstrations that happened beforehand, and I thought, this is going to be trouble. So Jim, who did the weather before I did the sports, said, "Wes, you're going to have to stay here because this is so electric that there's going to be problems." So we went outside, and there was a rope line, which means the line behind which people go and greet whoever the person is. And this happened to be Adlai Stevenson after his UN speech, which was interrupted several times.
Right.
And he went over to the rope line, and this woman came from behind and had a placard and struck him over the ear here. And he said, "Madam, what's the matter? What's bothering you?" And she said, "Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you." Well, well, of course, that made no sense whatsoever. But this turned out to be a scoop for me.
Yes.
It was the only motion picture film made of that woman doing that. Today, we all have cell phones and iPhones and so forth with cameras attached. There would have been 35 people around there taking the picture that I had as a scoop.
Yeah.
It would have been a scoop for 35 people then.
Now, how did you happen to, you just went next to her as part of your job. I guess you could see what was happening.
Yeah, I was just following his actions. But really I was following his actions with the idea. Val M., by the way, who was then the society editor of the Times Herald, is very evident in that picture.
Yes.
And the woman said, and I'm going to quote her now, "A Negro hit my arm from behind and made me hit." Well, Adlai Stevenson on his program played that back and forth, and there wasn't a black face anywhere in the crowd. And some people told me afterwards that that's when the National Football League started doing rebroadcasts of certain plays.
Now, of course, this was only 1 month before President Kennedy came to Dallas, so there were all sorts of fears about what happened at that when he came. Now, what was your assignment when the president came? Did you have an assignment that day?
Well, I had the assignment of greeting him at Love Field along with other people, and also broadcast of it. But back in those days, you were broadcaster both on radio and television. And so I had to take pictures of, I was glad to take pictures of the president getting off the plane along with the lovely Mrs. Kennedy, and then went atop the station wagon and described the event of his going through downtown Dallas. And my wife and I were watching the opening night at the museum, and somebody on the broadcast said, "Everybody feels like the President and Mrs. Kennedy is looking directly at them." And Sally, my wife, said, "That was you." And I didn't even know they had put that on the broadcast, but
Right.
I had made that comment on the what was a very friendly, as you know, a very friendly greeting to the President and Mrs. Kennedy through downtown Dallas.
Right. How about the the rest of the day for you, or perhaps the following day when you were at Dealey Plaza and you encountered one Jack Ruby?
Well, I saw Jack. I was in the KRLD station wagon, and it said KRLD TV on the side. And he came running over. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. And he came over, and I put the windows down, and we chatted for a while. And I said, he said, "You know, the first thing about this is Mrs. Kennedy is going to have to come back and testify against Lee Harvey Oswald." And I said, "Jack, that'll never happen. The station wouldn't allow it. The White House wouldn't allow it." I said, that'll never happen. And I told him about the Western saddles, which were going to be given by the city of Dallas to John and little Caroline. And I said, "They'll never see those saddles." And tears came to Ruby's eyes. And later, both the defense for Jack Ruby and the prosecution, Judge Henry Wade's district attorney, called me as a witness in the Ruby trial. One, why was Ruby there the day after the assassination and the day before he shot Lee Harvey Oswald? And second, that he showed emotion by having tears in his eyes.
Now, let's go to your decision to run for City Hall as an independent. Could you tell us a bit about your campaign? Was it different from today? Did you have to have a lot of money, or?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain this, but of course we knew that my name was well known.
Right.
So we didn't need to have the money to familiarize my name, but we did have to have some money to have a campaign headquarters, which we did establish across from what was then the First International Bank of Dallas. And I was really amazed at this was for city council now, I was really amazed at how many volunteer people came in to volunteer to run against the CCA. And in running against the CCA, I never knowingly criticized the Citizens Charter Association nor the Citizens Council from which the CCA came, because they had done a great job of, for example, integrating the Dallas public schools. There was never any demonstration about integrating lunch counters. Right. And I thought the city leaders did a fantastic job of that. So I never criticized them for what they did in their actions. I simply said that we ought to open up City Hall more to women who then took almost no part in city politics, and to minorities. And it was more or less on opening up a City Hall to the average person upon which I ran.
Now, as the only independent on the council, how are you treated by other councilmen and by the mayor, Eric Johnson, during that first term as city councilman?
Now you mean how we were treated by the mayor?
By the other council members.
When I was elected mayor, and now you're talking about when I was
that first race.
The first race as mayor?
As councilman.
Oh, as councilman?
How'd they treat you?
I was accepted, but sort of, well, the way it was described one time, I described it to Hank Tatum then a reporter for the Dallas Morning News, it was they tolerated me. Let's put it that way. And,
Okay.
but they were friendly, and we were friendly back and forth.
Okay. Now, should we ask what influenced you to run for mayor? You were successful running for the city council, and you decided you can take the top spot.
Right. And that was not an easy decision to make, believe me. At that time, the city councilman and mayor made $100 per meeting, and that was as much as I made the whole time I was on the city council. And that was per meeting. It wasn't per week or per day or whatever. That was per meeting. Right. And after I won, and your book says, I think it was 39,000, let's see, 57,000 to 39,000, right in that neighborhood. It was by an overwhelming majority, which really stunned me. It surprised me completely. And but I think it was recognized that people were ready for a change, and they wanted that change. But they also wanted the CCA to continue as members of the city council. And the one person who, the first meeting after the victory, and I was still a councilman at that time, but I was mayor-elect.
Right.
The one person who came around the corner of the horseshoe, you know, where the city councilman and council persons stay. The one person who came around was Mayor Johnson, extending his big hand, and he was a big man, and he has a giant hand, twice the size of mine. And he said, "Wes, you did it, and you did it right." Well, that was like a badge of honor to me, right? Because he was saying, not only did you win, and your book indicated he made the comment, "We got a licking." I never thought that was a comment that he would make. Yeah. But he, even though he took the defeat for his organization, the Citizens Charter Association, he was willing not only to congratulate me, but to say, "You did it right," which I took to mean, and still take to mean, I did it clean. There was never any dirty politics, and that was the way I kicked off my mayoralty.
Now, I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't ask you, as several people have requested, about your Volkswagen and how it became an issue and what it was all about.
Well, that was partly a settlement, a so-called settlement of a civil suit, which was a business suit, where I was assessed $15,000 in this civil suit, which was strictly a guise to try to embarrass me. And when I got the unmarked and unidentified mystery letter that said that my Volkswagen was going to be put up for sale at the county auction, I just shrugged my shoulders and said, "Well, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is." That was my second car that had to be part of that civil suit settlement. And this was never any indication of any wrongdoing or anything like that. It was simply the settlement of a civil suit. And unbeknownst to me, it was up for auction, and Bill Martin, who owned a downtown bar called the TV Bar, Bill Martin bought the Volkswagen for $600. It was worth about $150. And also, to my complete surprise, he came back over to my house on Lake Dale Drive, where our residence, and rang the doorbell, and my son, who is here today, Win, answered the door. And to Win's complete surprise and shock, Bill Martin handed him the keys, and he says, "Here, tell the mayor he's got his Volkswagen back." And
where's that Volkswagen today?
That Volkswagen today is down in Beaumont. The son still has it. And I don't think it runs. It rolls, but it doesn't run.
Could we ask you about your daily life as mayor for you and your wife, Sally? Did it change? I'm sure it did change a great deal.
Yes, it changed your life in one way, and yet in another way it does not. The kids still went to school, public schools. All of them went to public schools, and Wynn was elected president of the student body at Skyline High School. And in that respect, our lives did go on. Sally continued to work. I took a job at the World Trade Center as Vice President for International Relations, and it wasn't just a token job. It was one that Sally and I went over to Tokyo and Hong Kong on several different projects where I could serve both as mayor and as vice president of the World Trade Center. But the red Volkswagen was always my trademark and continued to be my trademark in subsequent elections after that. It was amazing, some of the volunteers that came out to help with volunteer or just came out of the woodwork. John Nyland, who was a member of the Dallas Cowboys, came every day, and I hadn't even met him. And at one time, the Cheney family, who I later worked for, the girls went to private schools and to the Christ the King Church private school, and they wore, as the girls did back in those days, maybe they still do, plaid skirts. And they came down as volunteers in my campaign headquarters, and one day somebody said, "How in the world did you have enough money to buy your volunteers uniforms?" Well, those, of course, were mostly Catholic uniforms, had nothing to do whatever with my campaign.
Now, as we know, Eric Johnson had failed in his effort to get the new IMP City Hall, which is so distinctive as part of our city. But when you became mayor, you said you favored the City Hall, and you managed to get the City Hall built.
Well, it came out I did an interview with Eric Johnson this was long after I left the mayoralty, and was involved with the Downtown Museum. That's the 6th floor museum, yeah, which, by the way, I'd recommend to any of you. I was doing an oral history with Eric Johnson, and he pointed out that as councilman, I opposed the City Hall, and when I became mayor, I changed my position. And I just flat out changed my position. Yeah. I finally said, okay, I was wrong, and I admit I was wrong. I think we do need that new City Hall, and I've supported it. And I'll have to hand it to the mayor, Mayor Johnson. He later said that gave me credit for getting the contract signed for the City Hall. Yeah. In the case of the IMP Museum, I considered that to be the cornerstone of the coming Arts District, and I thought it was important. And Mr. Pay himself said that Mayor Johnson had the vision of wanting that great Meyerson Symphony Hall, which I still think is one of the best in the country, right, maybe in the world, but that Mayor Wise had seen that through to fulfillment. And I appreciated that not only because it was a compliment to me, but it indicated the transition from one mayoralty to the next, even though there was an opposition involved there, that it continued to be cooperative. I wish there was more of that cooperation between the two political parties in Washington today.
Right. Now, I think we should mention the 6th floor museum now gives you credit for saving that historic building while you were mayor.
Well, one day there was I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was quite a movement, a real movement afoot to destroy that building, that it was a blot on the city of Dallas history. Well, in a way it was, but it was also history. And history doesn't always do just what you want it to do, it does what history does. And I fought this tooth and nail, but there was a resolution was being planned by the city council right at the peak of this determination to destroy the school book depository building. And one of the members of the CCA came to me privately and whispered in my ear, "Wes, there's going to be a resolution before the council today of supporting the destruction of the 6th floor museum." And I expressed appreciation of knowing ahead of time, and I was prepared when the resolution was about to be delivered. And I took the gavel and whacked it down as hard as I could, and I said, "That is not a resolution appropriate for this city council. Let's move on." Well, the person who was introducing the resolution, decided that they better back off, and they backed off, and of course the rest, as they say, is history. And I think they've done a good job with the museum. Stephen was here for the previous.
Now, another significant thing that happened while you were mayor was the opening of DFW Airport, the dedication and then the opening of it. And you had to be involved in some of that.
Very much so, right before the meeting, the biggest meeting was on the tarmac, as they call it these days. I still call it a runway, but that on the runway we had a special meeting, and Governor Connolly was in charge as master of ceremonies of that meeting. And before the meeting, the public relations man came apologetically to Sharkey Stovall, the mayor of Fort Worth, and myself, and said, look, rather than have you all make acceptance speeches at the tarmac, we're going to have you do it at the luncheon, and I hope you'll understand that. And of course, we both did, but it was sort of taking some of the starch out of our sails, I guess. And but nobody told Governor Connolly that we were not going to make a speech. So he introduced us, and somebody told me later, said, you know, that was one of the best speeches you ever made. Well, it was completely unprepared, completely off the top of my head, but it was a memorable meeting. But it was funny because Governor Connolly doesn't know to this day that he made a mistake in introducing us.
That's good. Now, I'm only going to ask a couple more questions, and we'll have questions from the audience. I want you to look back on your very active and important life, and tell us which part of it you view most fondly.
Oh, probably opening up the city hall to everybody. Opening it up, and I continued that business of the 2 hours on Wednesday afternoon from 1 to 3 to anybody that wished to come to see me. I didn't even limit it to the citizens of the city of Dallas. I just said anybody that wanted to come see. Again, today I might have to make special consideration for that because of the terrorism. But there was a button right down here at the side of my knee that if any trouble happened, there were some uniformed guards, not policemen, but uniformed guards there, who would come in and assist. And I was talking to a young lady who was doing a senior paper for one of the local public high schools, and my knee accidentally hit that alarm button, and in came the man with his hand at the side. I don't think he even had a sidearm, but as if he said, "What's the matter, Mayor? What's the matter, Mayor?" And she says, "All I wanted was an interview with you for the paper." There's one other story I'd like to tell. Getting the support of anybody for the first time I ran for mayor was not easy. And the Dallas Morning News, for which I had worked 4.5 years at WFAA, came out against me. The Dallas Times Herald, for which I had worked for 7.5 years at KRLD, came out against me. The Dallas Police Association came out against me. The Dallas Fire Association came out against me. Firefighters Association came out against me. And on the Saturday before the Tuesday election day, I was coming in, and Sally, who's here today, as we said, was sitting at the table reading the news, and she says, "Guess who's come out against you now?" I said, "Oh my God, don't tell me." She says, "That's right, God. The Dallas Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance has come out against you."
That's good. That's good. I think that's all for my questions. I think we can't top that one. We have just a few more minutes, and would be, and I know Wes would be delighted to hear your questions. Yes, we see somebody. Go ahead. DISD, the mess they're in. The Dallas Independent School District. I don't know if you've been reading our papers.
Yeah. You're talking about the separate consideration. I think the school board should be completely in charge of the public schools. All three of my children went to the Dallas public schools, and they all are in their own ways successful. And I do not think the city council should have jurisdiction over the school board, no.
All right.
And I think, by the way, the school board overall does a good job. I hate to see some scandal involved about some of the staff things, but I hated to see the scandal involved in the city council the last time out. So I detest dishonesty, and I detest cheating, and I don't care for deflated footballs.
Now, Steve Fagan maybe has a question. Steve.
Wes, you were mayor during the 10th anniversary of the assassination in '73, and I know it was difficult to represent the so-called city of hate during that time. Can you tell the story about the mayor's conference?
Yes, obviously you've heard the story before, but I'll repeat it, and it was a memorable thing. It was exactly 10 years later, in 1973, when I was selected to go to the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting in Chicago. And we were a group of us at the end of the day. We're standing around sipping our cocktails, and one of the people there in the group, a group of about five, said, Wes, how does it feel to be mayor of the city that assassinated the president? And I was told that I started clenching my fist. And one of the two of the fellow mayors were ready to hold me because they were afraid that I was going to attack the guy, and I'm sure that was running through my head. Well, of course, that would have been the worst thing in the world for publicity for me and for the city of Dallas had I had any kind of a physical retort to that. But it hurt, number one, and number two, it was totally unfair. And the next day, both several of the mayors who were in that group and the man who made the comment came to me and said, look, that was my liquor that got the best of me on that. So he said, I apologize, and I said, I accept your apology.
Now, I think we can all see why Wes is one of the greatest mayors we've ever had and one of the most popular personalities in our history. So, Wes, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.